You are listening to Contesting Wrestling, the podcast where I am on a quest to force two people I care about deeply to answer hostile questions about the things that they love, that if someone was to subject me to that questioning, I would surely wither quite quickly. My name is Evan Burke. I'm a writer. I say that. I haven't written anything in a while, but I'm spending a lot of time editing this podcast, which is great.
So
I
you're
love
an
it.
Editor.
I mean, yeah, all right, that works. That works.
They get paid more.
They get paid a lot more.
They do, and it's on. Yeah, I get paid. If we ever make money off this podcast, I will be getting paid to edit out my own stuttering. So that's a metaphor, surely for something.
That's the American dream.
Who knows what it is? Let's go around with the introductions, and then we'll get to our extremely highly special guest today.
I am Dr. Ben Abelson. I'm a professor of philosophy at Mercy College and a lifelong devotee of what goes on in the squared circle.
And my name is Dr. Diamondfire. I've been involved in professional wrestling for well over 10 years. I do commentary, ring announcing, wrestling. I've worked backstage, front of stage. I do a little bit of everything. And I'm very happy to have our guest on today, the impresario and creative force behind extremely serious wrestling, Mr. Fesh.
Hey, what's up?
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Excellent. I'm good. Happy to be here.
Fesh, your alter ego is Professor Kampfnut?
It's just Doctor.
Dr.
Doctor.
Which means
Three
that
docs.
we now have 3 doctors on the show for the first time.
Yeah, catch up, Evan. Come on. Let's go.
And you are also a former extremely serious wrestling world champion.
That's true. Yeah, the first and so far longest reign.
That feels like, so you run it and you were also the champion. I'm
was,
just going to
yeah.
point out that might be what we call corruption.
That's the wrestling business.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
My attitude was always, hey, if you want to do that, then start your own show and then book yourself as the champion.
Yeah.
That's all. If you have a problem with that, you could. I didn't do anything, trickery. I just started a brick and mortar situation and then ran with it.
Also, like when you start a creative endeavor like a wrestling league like this, especially if there isn't like money involved, especially at the beginning, you don't know who's going to show up next
Exactly.
week or next month or who's
Exactly.
actually going to prioritize your
And
show. But you're going to prioritize your own show.
Yeah, and without burying anybody specifically, it's just there's been situations where the plan was to do something else, and it just was proven that it can't be due to situations like that. So I moved on, and
I
things changed.
was a substitute when I first started fighting the Big Floss Man.
Yeah.
And we stretched that out for 6 months.
Exactly.
That was great.
And you did do, of course, the proverbial job eventually.
Oh, of course. 364 days into the reign.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
I watched a big chunk of of an XSW event recently. I am going to go home and watch more of it, which technically might mean that you guys have already won this podcast because we have specified in the past that they will win this podcast the day that I choose to watch wrestling unrelated to this podcast. However, as a longtime comedy nerd and somebody who did comedy, it might not count because I would say that your work straddles the line between the two in a way that I found very interesting.
So this gets into some game theory stuff here of like what defines the bounds of winning in this situation. So you have to define if my show is wrestling to begin with, right?
Right.
But
and I think there are definitely some people in the business who would say that it is not professional wrestling.
Look, it absolutely is professional wrestling unless you're from the State Athletic Commission, in which case it is definitely not professional wrestling.
No, it's a comedy show.
It does not fit your standards
Exactly.
of professional wrestling, therefore.
Hey, the Big Floss Man is a medical professional, so...
Well,
there you go.
Within the narrative of the show, we call ourselves Extremely Serious Wrestling. Within canon, it is. We are a wrestling show that is pretending to be a sketch show, so we don't have to deal with the athletic commission.
There you go.
So it's a knobbing up on a baseball bat of levels of reality that I'm trying to do with it. And that is, I would say, Evan, you're kind of my target audience. There's a philosophy, especially in WWE, where it's kind of like, we got the wrestling fans already. We don't need to try to get them. It's the other people we need to work at getting. So I'm very happy to hear that. And I wanted to be a show for people who, in this exact situation, people are trying to get their friends into wrestling. I want to be the gatekeeper to that, I guess.
Right off the bat, there is something that's happening in XSW that that we've talked about in the past, where I always feel like a really underused thing in wrestling that should exist a lot more is you don't really hear a lot of dialogue between the wrestlers.
Right.
Now, obviously, the point is because you're supposed to be, solving your problems with violence and not through talking.
And also, you don't really want to mic them while they're in the ring
Right.
together
Yes.
because they're saying a lot of stuff that you're not supposed to hear at all.
No, exactly. And so, there are a lot of reasons that you can't hear, but I was watching the XSW stuff. I'm like, oh my God, like they can explore this. Like there was a point where the commentators were talking and the wrestlers were talking and they were both saying funny shit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what an unusual situation to be watching wrestling and too many people are saying too many things that you want to hear.
That you want to hear.
Yeah,
Yes,
that are
yes.
actually
That's
good.
the rare part. Yeah.
And so, like, now XSW's the way that it's set up is, it is 100% the theatrical side of wrestling. Nobody's really doing anything like athletic.
I would say, with quote unquote real wrestling, the ratio, whatever that number is that you internalize to be like, it is partially this, partially that, we just flip that. We just invert it and maybe do inflate the theatrical way more. But there is definitely, I'm not trying to protect anything and say we're tough guys, but there's definitely a risk to I don't know if I'd say a lot, but some of what we do.
The occasional bump is taken. The occasional wrestling move is done.
It all gets into it all gets into this idea that wrestling, from the creator's point of view, the goal is to get the most by doing the least. And I'm very much exploiting that, but I do understand, and this we'll get into this idea with the good match as well, that sometimes when you're teaching the audience, they can only, there's a cap to what they can expect with specifically our show, so we need to do something. I took a rock bottom on a chair about a year ago for the show because I knew no one expected to see that at our show.
And so you have done a little bit of wrestling training in the ring also.
Yeah.
Like there aren't a lot of people who regularly show up at XSW shows that have trained extensively, but a few people have taken a few classes, and those people have managed to help out everyone else to have just a couple of the very basics. Like if you sit down at a piano and they show you a few chords, you sound infinitely better than somebody who doesn't know how a piano works,
Exactly.
even if you can't read music and play a song.
Yeah, I saw you take a couple of bumps in the match with Mondo Pussy that looked like legit bumps.
Yeah.
I also the last XSW show that I went to, Show of Honor, you had these guys, the Ugly Ducklings, on, and they did some pretty wild spots.
They're great.
And
they're the best.
I remember we were talking in the bar afterwards, and you expressed the kind of anxiety over what the show was becoming.
If you go back and watch that, I'm on commentary for that match, and my hands are on my temples for a good part of it because I'm just like. And I said this to you. It's like again, getting into game theory and what the show is. It's like I didn't know what the show was anymore. Once we're seeing assisted moonsaults and the like,
You had the one show where you booked all those indie wrestlers, so they're gonna do what they're hired to do. And those guys in the Ugly Ducklings are crazy in the best way. I mean, they're from the deep south, but they're always wrestling around the Northeast. They just drive up and down the East Coast all the time.
And there's this growing movement in wrestling of wrestlers wrestling in strange locations. So I saw Chuck Taylor and Zack Sabre Jr. wrestle in a bar.
Yeah.
And, they're just figuring out how to do things kind of safely without a ring.
There's also a moment in that match, too, where they're setting up for a big double team thing where one guy monkey flips the other guy into their opponent. Yeah. And I knew it was coming as Fesh, and I had to kind of bend the reality to be like, I can tell people are going to be worried about whatever this is. So I did it. You just see me just go, whatever's about to happen, we're going to be fine. Everybody just know it's fine. And then they do something very dangerous, but hopefully my forewarning helped.
Now, it looked like there was a mix of, there were a couple people who I feel like I recognized from my UCB days. So, it looked like there was a mix of indie wrestlers and comedy folks.
Again, we're mostly comedy people, and some of those comedy people have training as well. And then there are some that are straight up just people I've brought in from the wrestling world who are just also funny.
And I feel like there's a lot of the cross pollination there has to be really interesting.
Yeah.
What's something that's like unexpected that you've seen putting wrestlers and comedians together?
Well, my favorite thing about bringing people from the wrestling world in who are purely wrestling people is when I tell them what I want them to do or leave it up to them what they want to do, the freedom that they're given, which I think is very interesting because, we're all mud show outlaw guys anyway, so it feels like you can do whatever you want in the world. That's what I love about wrestling is like anything is possible. And I'm just trying to lean into that harder with our show. So when a guy whose gimmick is already what somebody would consider silly comes to our show and goes, wait, I get to do something even more silly than that. That's the most exciting thing. And I think what I love about it is it's the marriage that's like both worlds want the same thing. They just went about it a different way. And so when I get to have those people meet to create that one thing that gives them that, it's very, very exciting.
Well, and they're kind of both trying to create the image of, like, wrestling is ostensibly trying to create the image that it is a real, athletic event, per se. And then improv, at least, is sort of trying to create, it's not necessarily trying to convince the audience that it's a real thing, but it's trying to be as well constructed as something that was previously written.
And there is that invisible fourth wall in front of it that just like, cool, you bought into this by coming here.
Yes.
We can't sit here and explain that to you. You just have to know that this is what's up. When I'm pretending to hold a glass, we cannot get into how that is fake. You just have to accept that that is real.
I noticed that at least one of your characters, Sean from Michael's, as in Michael's Art Supply Store, and I think maybe some others, I had recognized from the Upright Citizens Brigade wrestling promotion that existed several years ago.
They just ended this past summer. I was working with them for 6 years, and it was just it was the best, but it was very frustrating. There was only so many opportunities to perform, and in those 6 years, I was just trying to fine tune if I were in charge and had my druthers, how would the show function differently? So when I finally decided to pull the trigger on that, I just said, guys, let's go. So it's very few characters.
By pull the trigger, you mean shoot UCBW in the head and kill them, right?
Essentially, it took. It was more like shoot him in the knees and
shoot
then
him
let
in the
them.
knees,
So
they could have healed, but they didn't. That's as I understand.
Leave UCB to itself long enough, and it'll shoot itself.
And I was only talking about the small pocket. It just seems like that spread to the rest of the theater as well.
So in some way, they pioneered this sort of thing in the abstract.
Oh,
how is XSW similar or different from what they were doing?
I have no qualms in saying that I just stole the concept of the show. But in terms of in similarities, it's take the same. If it's music, we're playing the same genre, we're playing on the same instrumentation, but it's just a matter of how it's showcased. The fact that they were a weekly show that only had one match that built to every 4 months, or not even. But they had 3 pay-per-views a year. So the opportunity for storytelling, which is the most interesting part of what we do, was much smaller.
Were they more improv and you guys are a little bit more written?
In the sense that the writing was done on much shorter notice. The way Cage Match functioned was every Thursday. I mean, it was up to the performers, but it seemed like everybody functioned this way for the most part. So it was 2 improv teams facing off against each other, and in the middle there was a wrestling match. So while the first team was performing for about 25 minutes, you'd write and run the match in the back.
You'd call a match, basically.
That's how wrestling works.
Pretty much.
And when people hear it's improvisers doing wrestling, you would think a lot more of it would be...
Cage match is still a thing, though. They just don't have the wrestling anymore, right?
Yes.
Okay. Every time I went, the cage match portion itself was always pretty cool.
Yeah. But there became this weird, I don't want to say schism, but going in there and being there pretty much just for the wrestling aspect puts you in this class of people performing that was very different from people who were there performing the improv, and that kind of started to go both ways for me after a while. And I just said, let's just lose the improv part of this, because that's the thing, is the audience was coming for the improv, not the wrestling, and so we were inherently this menace to them to be like, all right, this is the part where you go to the bathroom, this is where you do,
and especially
the wrestle folks are here.
Exactly. Well, and especially in New York, like, improv is kind of a thing that, like, not cool kids like the club kids or something, but like improv is sort of like it's a scene, it's a thing that people are really into, and it's people who are maybe often the kind of people who will look down on wrestling.
Sure.
I say that as somebody who is 100% one of those guys.
And I think that that show started in like 2005 and now went to 2017. I do think there was a time where we could have turned, and I feel like that wall is less up now between cool kids and wrestling kids, and I put both in quotes.
Well, wrestling itself has gotten a lot cooler,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of that. I mean, this is a whole other subject. The uncoolness of the WWE.
Right.
While, and this is I think important, while the WWE actually maintains its size, so it can be the monolith that's uncool, and there's plenty of room for all of this other wrestling that's happening now to be cool, and it has that cool factor because you haven't heard of it, even if it's now also on network television.
Right.
That's kind of the culmination of 18 years of prestige indies to where we are now.
I'm worried AEW is losing that cool pretty quickly, though.
Well, I've said that what AEW's needed to do then is produce a good, just regular show. You can't have that shine on you forever. If 6 months into Dynamite, it's still a decent show, great. Yeah. But it won't be that cool.
Well, and, I wonder how many other people are going through something that is kind of similar to what I have gone through on this podcast, where you really only have to learn a little bit about wrestling to get to the point where you begrudgingly admit it's more interesting than you gave it credit for. And that is an important first step. That really is,
I talk to people like my colleagues at Mercy College, and they're like, oh, there's a story that continues from one match to the next? Like, yes!
Well, that kind of gets into my issues with UCPW, and there's in issues with other things in the world of wrestling where it's like they were only doing these weird hashtag game, like, what if a bread was a wrestler, and it existed in a vacuum. Whereas the fun part of wrestling for me is the theatrical aspects of it. When you see wrestling parody, The Simpsons, Bart's flipping through the channels, and it's two wrestlers who just got married are hitting each other over the head with chairs and fire extinguishers. That's what people who don't like wrestling think wrestling is. A certain type in the periphery is the male soap opera thing. It's like, yeah, when you don't have that, then it's literally just people hitting each other over the head with things, and it is dumb as people think it is.
I was really impressed, years ago when they did the South Park episode about wrestling, because they got everything right. When they're in the arena watching the WWE show, the caricatures of Edge and John Cena, they're not the Crusher wrestling. One of them slowly whips the other one off the ropes. They take a frame to show them calling the spot. One of them throws a slow clothesline and they pose to the crowd. And then when the kids form their own wrestling league, they never fight. They just come up with characters and do promos, which was Monday Night Raw at the time to a T.
Well, that was Monday Night Raw, I guess maybe like 5 years before they did that episode.
It dragged on forever.
But I think you're right. They got a lot of wrestling right in that episode. What was missing was the wrestling.
Right.
And I think as much as the drama and the theater is incredibly important, for wrestling fans, we love how the story is expressed through the wrestling moves.
Yeah.
And that is lost on a lot of people as well, I think.
So I'm going to... I'm not trying to end this podcast here, but this is what I usually tell people to get them into wrestling, at least as an idea, which you seem already to understand the concept of. But it is a mosaic of mosaics of Rube Goldberg machines.
Okay. All right, I'm in.
So Ricochet will do two front flips onto a guy, and that, just as a 2-second clip on Twitter, is interesting and cool in its own right. Then you realize that is a part of a machination of a story being told in a match, and then you zoom out to realize that is a story that exists in a 2-hour, 3-hour program on television. You zoom out, that's part of the weekly television. You zoom out, that's part of the build to a pay-per-view, and then that's just 1/4 of one company's...
And all the companies in some way are actually part of one larger wrestling universe.
One organism.
As much as they pretend that that's not the case.
The business.
Yeah, so there is this ecosystem and canon to all of it where it's like our show, even though, again, it's this weird, petri dish, but like it will still reference the history in a way that, could be alienating, but if you then go in and do your... Like Shawn from Michaels, we never explain... Hey, this guy is like that one wrestler. We just do all of it, and if you get that for the reference sake, you get enjoy. But I still think the guy's entertaining enough that if you don't know who Shawn Michaels is, you're still like, I like this guy.
Well, and that's also really how references should be used comedically. Like, it shouldn't be the entire joke shouldn't be making the reference.
Right.
It should be a joke that stands on its own.
Right.
And then also, if you get the reference, that's a cool bonus.
That's one of the problems with WWE television is they expect, one, their audience to be dumb as shit, and secondly, they ruin everything that could be interesting and clever by making sure that it's all as explicit as possible, and they beat you over the head with it.
I was always a big fan of like the Animaniacs when I was a kid. And they would make a lot of references to old Hollywood. And 10-year-olds don't know anything about old Hollywood. They might have seen a couple of old movies. But, you know, the character comes out doing Jerry Lewis. It's funny.
Yeah.
You don't have to know who Jerry Lewis is or the characters in his movie. And it'd be a lot less funny if there was a voiceover going, he's doing an impression of Jerry Lewis right now. It's like, what? Why? What? Stop. Just let the guy do the silly voice and I'll laugh.
When I watched the initial airing of the Simpsons episode with the Planet of the Apes musical, I was unaware of the existence of the Planet of the Apes film franchise. I was like, what a delightful concept for a musical the Simpsons have devised this evening.
It was still good though, right?
Oh, it was fucking great. It was great. And then I saw the movie and then I was like, this has whole new dimensions to it. What is this is a larger question that you can feel free to compress this answer if you want. But what is I am always fascinated by where the line is between how written wrestling is. Like how what would you say is how do you make the balance between writing it and the wrestlers sort of improvising as is traditionally what happens in wrestling?
So with XSW, it's very written. It's pretty much beat for beat because we
Even the commentary?
So they are looking at the match, and it is like, so Boulangerie throws him in the corner, then rolls to do this, and then in bold caps, it's like, does whatever the name of her move is to make sure that gets over.
Okay.
They are then finding their own rhythm in between, and like you watch LA Styles, he has a very specific style of how he wants to do his commentary, which I would never write.
Can I point something out from what you're saying here? Is we're talking about trained comedians that are for the most part not wrestlers that are used to working in theaters with scripts, and their scripts are less detailed than the scripts they hand the wrestlers at Monday Night Raw to do their promos.
Absolutely.
And it's also infinitely more entertaining. Man, I really have been crapping on Raw a lot, and I really don't want this podcast to become a bunch of guys, crap on Raw. But really, that's the comparison. You know, the commentators get a script with, like you said, the moves and the move names, and they fill in the rest because they're good.
And in terms of promos, I just tell them, this is why you're doing a promo. This is the vague direction I need it to go. After that, you know this, I never give anybody time or...
It seems like...
I said it before the last show, like, if my whole segment goes 5 minutes, I'll be surprised. And you were like, you know, you waved your hand like, we're completely non-committal. It's fine.
It's going to be great.
So it seems like it's... like wrestling is like improv, less in the sense that it is like if you go to a comedy theater and watch an improv show and there's a back line and they're doing, and it's a lot more like a Christopher Guest movie or Curb Your Enthusiasm or something like. Where if you've ever seen the scripts for Christopher Guest movies or for Curb Your Enthusiasm or anything like that. Yeah, it's all of the beats. It's the plot. There might be 1 or 2 times where it's like, say this particular sentence here, but then feel free to work around it, because it seems like the idea is you have your vision, you have what you want to happen, but you also know that this only works if you let people get out there and do the things that they're good at.
They're not dolls. They're even removing wrestling from it, going back to UCB and stuff, they had bit shows that was like, let's do, it's the final episode of The Sopranos, so we're doing an hour-long Soprano show. And I was interviewed about the difference between UCBW and those shows, and now this same thing carries over to XSW. It's the difference between a game of Monopoly and a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, you're still filling the same time in your meetup, but whatever happened here still matters in the future. And everybody, like, being a Thimble versus being Gorvan the Destroyer, like, it's a wildly different space to play in.
All right, so we could talk to you for hours
Sorry.
about XSW.
and
I'm sorry to stop that at this point, but we should get to our matches for the week.
Can I get one thing in about
Yeah.
the Christopher Guest movies? If you want to see an example of like wrestling done in that, watch the DVD commentary for This Is Spinal Tap. Because it's the three of them just doing their characters the whole time, as though some hack documentarian made a movie that made them look like idiots
awesome.
20 years previous.
That's great.
They're
And they
still
just
the best.
go, and that's that.
Evan, you had a last.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say there will be an episode in the future where we do a much more in-depth interview on this because I find this fucking fascinating, and this is also. And frankly, I enjoyed XSW more than 95% of the WWE matches that you guys have shown me over. Yeah.
And so will you.
And before we throw to this, I just want to say these two matches we're going to get into today, I chose because they are the two parts of my brain. And they are the elements that went on to make Extremely Serious Wrestling. Go ahead.
Excellent. So, so our good match, which I was overjoyed when Doc told me that Fesh wanted to discuss this one, is Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar from last year's Survivor Series 2018. At the time, Bryan was the WWE champion and Lesnar was the Universal champion, though neither title was on the line. And I consider this to be the first contemporary pro wrestling masterpiece. And I have a lot to say about it. I'm really excited to hear what Fesh has to say. Always interested to hear what Doc has to say about these matches, and intrigued about what Evan might say and whether he'll pick up on some of the same things that we find really amazing about this one. And then the bad match for this week is Oz, the Great and Powerful, versus Tim Parker from WCW Super Brawl 1. In 1991.
Let's give Tim Parker his... Come on, Tim Parker!
Tim, I was originally going to be like some schlub named Tim Parker, but I thought leaving it at just his name was sufficient.
Oh, boy.
And I'm really excited to talk about that match as well.
It is a match that the introduction to the match seemed to last for hours or days, and in some ways feel like I'm still on my couch watching the introduction to that match.
Welcome to Oz.
And yet the actual match itself lasted as long as that pause that I just made.
Yes.
Which was very interesting.
I think there were 2 moves, maybe 3.
I think if you count a boot to the gut, I think 3,
Yeah. That's Oz's entire range at the time.
I thought the match itself as a squash match, and Evan has been wanting to do a whole episode on squash matches.
Well, yeah, because you guys keep talking about it. I'm mostly fascinated by the jobber position.
Sure.
That seems like a really interesting part of wrestling to me.
But yeah, I thought as a squash it was actually very effective. That Oz's finisher was devastating. He picks him up.
He drops a house on him.
He spins him up in the air and he lands right. Yeah, basically.
Oh, man.
Evan, you didn't recognize Oz once he took the mask off?
I did not. You guys were like, oh, do you recognize this dude? I mean, I guess he looked like sort of a generic Lee Handsome kind of...
Are you a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fan?
Oh, we haven't told him about this either.
I would say I am. Yeah, sure.
How about Secret of the Ooze? You like Secret of the Ooze?
Yeah, it's been a while since I watched it,
And
but
you didn't recognize Oz.
it was that Casey Jones?
No.
No.
Okay, so
Think
no, right, that
bigger.
was Elias Koteas.
Think bigger.
Was that?
Super.
Oh, what else? What else happened in that movie?
he was the Super Shredder.
But
that's
You
not.
didn't recognize
But
no,
that's not where you should have recognized him from. That is Kevin Nash.
Punisher movie. You did the first Punisher movie.
That is Kevin Nash, who you know as Big Daddy Cool Diesel.
Wait,
from
that's
the
the
match
same
with
guy?
Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the
This
guy.
this was years before he was Diesel. They were like, man, you're really tall and muscular. We're going to put the most ridiculous gimmick we can think of on you and present you to the
He
crowd.
looked like he was like from a different place. Like
Well, he had a
looked-
silver mullet.
Well, he's from a different land. It's
I-
called Oz.
yeah,
He was jacked. He
obviously.
was jacked to the gills. At
Oh,
that
they
point.
were not drug testing at that point in WCW for anything. He was much heavier as Oz than he was as Diesel. And
Huh.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
that guy.
I did not.
He also wasn't like out of breath for the whole match,
I guess I
like
only
he was
saw
in the
his
other
face
one.
for 2 seconds.
That's
right.
That's really the whole. Because there was the intro was going on, and I'll be honest, I kind of got on my phone after a while with the intro. I was like, oh my god. And then Laura was like, oh, it started, and I was like, huh, what? Oh, and then it was over, and then so that was.
And those big bug eyes.
I mean, he effectively threw that guy into the floor. Like,
Yeah.
that looked very convincing.
Well,
The same way that was why I commented on the match between him and Shawn Michaels when we watched it, is that it did really, like, his finishing move really looks like he is saying, like, I am throwing this person into the garbage.
Yeah.
I am done with this person.
So I want to give some context on the Wizard of Oz thing, not explaining to everybody what the Wizard of Oz is. That's a different podcast. So the reason that they did Oz, WCW had just been acquired by Turner. And Turner was pushing heavily their classic movies. You never made that connection, did you?
No, and that
no.
rules.
So they were
And
pushing.
they were
at
really
this
pushing
point,
Zardoz. No?
no,
It's not
no.
that. It's not
They were
classic.
really pushing. We have the Wizard of Oz. So why not make a Wizard of Oz character in WCW? Right? That's how wrestling works.
Yeah.
This was
Well,
Dusty Rhodes'
I mean, it kind
creation,
of is.
right?
Yeah, this was Dusty's creation, according to Kevin Nash. And
and
Dusty's had some great ideas, and this was not one of them.
Dusty's on commentary, just gushing over it the whole time. Like, wow, this really knocked my socks off. Oh, this is awesome. I love Dusty, but yeah,
yeah, of
he's
course.
responsible for some of the greatest and worst things in wrestling history.
So so when I was given the binary of good and bad
Yeah.
coming on here, it's like, well, I love bad shit.
Yeah, so do we.
Yeah,
That's
that's the thing that was
the
hard. It's
reason
like,
we show bad stuff to Evan is not to torture Evan,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
if that's what happens.
It's part of the reason.
It's
a little
because like wrestling fans like to celebrate these gigantic blunders because it's funny. It's like, how did enough people approve this?
A recurring theme on this podcast apparently is that I, as somebody who does not like wrestling but am begrudgingly like willing to admit that there's some stuff that's cool, I seem to have basically the same position as most wrestling fans.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
most like lifelong WWE devotees.
I remember years ago we were watching Raw and you were there and you were trying to watch it, and then an hour or two into it you start going, this is terrible, and then you list everything all the wrestling fans complain about on Raw, and you're like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to crap on your stuff, and we're like, no, this episode is bad. Most of the episodes now are bad. We wish it was better. We have better wrestling around,
Yeah.
but it's not produced on television every week for hours and hours.
The difference is the wrestling fans, and by now they've lost me, at least as a weekly viewer. But people just keep watching it, no matter how bad they've.
well, it's ritual. It's it's especially generationally spiritual stuff isn't connecting as hard with certain a large swath
Yeah,
of the
that's true.
no,
population. and
rather
that's-
than going to church,
Yeah.
we go to the arena
so
for
it's
sure.
just
and
paying our penance,
and like there's the power of nostalgia
absolutely.
where it's like, I mean, I watched all of Disenchantment twice. It's not funny. It's really not funny, but Matt Groening's art style is such and he was on the Epstein plane, so like there's like all kinds of questionable shit now. Did you not read about that? It's fucked up. And so but like Matt Groening is just such an integral part
There's
of
a
my
pleasure
childhood.
center
Yeah.
that just hits when you see the art style.
That
yeah.
so that even though like Disenchantment's not really that good, I still just I'm watching it and it's pressing that button.
Yeah.
I watched the first few episodes. I thought it was fine. But, like,
Yeah.
whenever I see The Simpsons now, I think it's fine.
Right.
Yeah,
But whenever
exactly.
I see The Simpsons from 20 years ago, I think this is incredible
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
Beat for beat. The joke with them in the phone booth doesn't age well. The joke with them not knowing what a computer is doesn't age well. Well, the show's been on for 30 years, so there you go.
So all right, this
Welcome
match.
to Oz.
Are we talking odds first? Is
Let's talk the
We have been, so we
Yeah.
can,
I
and
think,
if it
yeah,
goes
let's-
second,
yeah.
we can
I
cut
just
it
said
up.
everything I was going to say
I
about Oz already.
yeah. I would like
the two things that
Please,
went around
keep
there.
it going, keep it going.
Finding out that was the origin of the Oz gimmick was just a corporate tie-in.
Yeah.
This past Wednesday, Rick and Morty invaded AEW.
Yes,
in a way
they
that
did.
is much
Oh, I
more
didn't see
naked
it. How
than
was
that?
that?
They
was
did
fine.
it right in the sense they put it with the best friends, where it's like, all right, these guys, even in their gimmicks, are dudes who would watch Rick and Morty. Even if
It
they
was
don't
also
in
the
reality.
Halloween episode, so it would
Yeah.
make more sense that they'd dress up. They more come out and cosplay it, Orange Cassidy is out there.
just
Then he takes it off.
Yeah.
Which feels a very on-game move for him to eventually be like, all right, I'm done doing this thing. Let me do
sit
my
in the
thing.
corner with my hands in my pockets.
They got to be stacking money because I also saw the Death Stranding Rick and Morty ad,
Okay.
which Death Stranding is a huge video game that's about to come out. That's been like hotly anticipated for, and they did a fucking 30-second Rick and Morty ad where they're like the characters from Death Stranding talking about it.
Maybe those 2-year breaks are just
Yeah.
stockpiling money.
I have a feeling that Harmon wants to get out pretty soon.
Probably, yeah.
And he just wants to milk it as much as he can.
I think he knows that the kind of fan base that is so rabid for his stuff will turn on him as soon as something happens that they don't like. So the best way to do that is to not produce it.
And what was your second
The
thing?
other thing is about Dusty. He also had the Hunchbacks, right? That was him, right?
No, I don't think they were the Hunchbacks. I think the Hunchbacks was Bill Hurd,
Okay.
one of the interim presidents of WCW, which is a whole other story. Maybe I'll tell you one day, Evan. It's not
A lot of
interesting.
sources of bad creative in WCW.
So was Hurd also the Ding Dongs, or was that Dusty?
I think Hurd was also the Ding Dongs.
Okay, then I'm conflating.
Dusty
He might have
had
been the
some bad-
Dynamic Dudes. Was that?
Okay.
You know, they just covered the Dynamic Dudes on Jim Ross's podcast this week, and he says it was the Dynamic Dudes was a collective effort of everyone on the committee at the time, including himself, including Jim Cornette, it was guys who said skateboarding was big amongst the kids, so have them come out with their skateboards, and kids will bring their skateboards to the arena. It's like, well, what will they do with their skateboards?
Yeah.
in the
Also,
arena?
Evan, these were guys who could not skateboard.
They could not
Yeah.
skateboard. If
But
they
could
could
throw up a
skateboard.
shaka like nobody can.
Right now in AEW, there's a guy named Darby Allin who can skateboard, and so he uses a skateboard, and everybody loves it because you can tell he can really skateboard. He'll skateboard down the ramp and clothesline
But
somebody.
that just wasn't enough to keep the whole thing going.
There was Toasty Tom in House of Glory first. But
Sure.
What's a shame is that everything you just said also true about the Beto O'Rourke campaign.
If he had skateboarded on stage and just clotheslined everyone else, that'd be.
It did. He did do. You saw him skateboarding on stage. He had.
Yes.
Oh, he had many events where he skateboarded on stage.
But no
Yeah.
violence.
So I'm sorry for conflating Dusty and Bill Hurd, but I hear all those things, and there's a pleasure center in my brain that hits. And with the entire experience of XSW, it's kind of like, I've cut out a middleman and cheated a little bit by putting it in this weird negative zone between two worlds, but it is a challenge to me to justify everything ridiculous that we do and try to make the most ridiculous ideas matter and have a gravity to them, and instead of and then it's a therefore. And when it is just Oz exists purely as we have Wizard of Oz, he's big, let's put him out there, as opposed to why is he Oz, where's Oz going? Because the fun thing about Oz is I last summer went through on the network and watched every Oz match there was. There's about 5.
Yeah, he says in total he had maybe 20 matches as Oz, and it was really over in Japan when they went to Japan.
No doubt.
Yeah.
But, you watch that entrance, and it's big. The second entrance, not quite as big. Third entrance, there's no mask anymore. Fourth entrance, it's just a cape, no intro,
No
barely
monkey.
any music, no nothing. And by the last match, he doesn't even have the cape anymore.
Yeah.
It's stripping everything away because they've bailed on the idea. And I feel like so much what we call bad wrestling is not that the idea is inherently bad, just that you clearly didn't plan out where it should go, why it's happening, you didn't commit to it. And to tie this back to the good match, one of my big wrestling philosophies is anything is allowed as long as you take the right route to get there, and then that route, that getting there affects the larger picture. And I think the good match, again, it kind of does exist in a vacuum. Bryan won the title 6 days before.
yeah, so I can provide the whole
Please,
context
yeah.
for the thing. Before that, I just want to mention Paul Heyman. I think this is like the sort of difference in the booking strategies of, say, Paul Heyman versus Vince McMahon, where Paul Heyman has always said he always has a finish in mind.
Yeah.
He always has an end to the story, and he doesn't do anything unless he has that payoff in mind. Whereas the WWE seems to just start things, and then they meander into nowhere.
And you can't even call it treading water because it's not consistent enough. Like, to tread water, you have to constantly be doing it. But if you do it for 2 weeks and then it just disappears from TV, Mike Kanellis and Maria Kanellis, took big swings for 2 weeks and now are no longer on TV at all.
It's like the Stephen Moffat approach to writing, right? Where it's like, if you watch the Stephen Moffat years on Doctor Who, or if you watch the new Sherlock, it's kind of got this constant like, oh, big crazy plot twist. What's going to happen? tune in next season and you'll find out. And then that thing slowly becomes less important over the course of the next season. And it's like, oh, here's another plot twist. What's going to go on? Like, find out. Maybe it'll resolve in the future. And then just nothing ever resolves because they're just doing these big spots to try to get you to come back and not actually doing anything.
Or Lost, which set up all these
ultimates.
mysteries. And it was really funny because after the Fiend Rollins debacle at Hell in a Cell, Carl Anderson did an interview where he was like, hey, man, I really like that show Lost. And, sometimes you just got to wait it out and see what happens. And it's like, that is not the right analogy.
No, not in the slightest.
It is the right analogy, but it is not a helpful one.
So before we get into context of this match, I want to say why I'm tying this to that is beyond this match existing in vacuum being good, like I said about the mosaics and all that, I already loved this match, and then the SmackDown after, Daniel Bryan cuts a promo that retroactively justifies certain things in this match that leads to the future of his character.
I didn't get a chance to
I did
watch
ask
it.
you to
Yes,
watch
you
it.
did. I'm sorry. I did not get a chance to watch it.
Hold on.
We can explain
I
it
didn't
all.
get a
It's
chance
fine.
to watch it either. Can we just pause and I can bring up the network on my phone? We can watch it. We've done shit like that before.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Give me 1 minute.
I will take this moment also just to quickly say when I was 17, I took a writing class with legendary cult science fiction author Terry Bisson, who wrote "They're Made of Meat" is probably his most famous short story. Yeah, it's an amazing thing. He taught me something that he was talking about writing science fiction, but it is probably the most universally applicable rule to like any art form whatsoever, be it wrestling or free jazz or anything, where you can go as far out and be as weird as you want, but the further out you go, the more you have to have something that connects people. The more that you have to do that work. And like that's why it is hard to make stuff that is really out there and still connects with people, because the further out you go, the more you have to do that work to really get somebody in there, to really get somebody involved.
And I personally have a hang up with fantasy. I'm easier with sci-fi because, again, I can see that work because some of that work I've already brought to it by just being a person. There's usually a base reality of that. With fantasy, you have to learn the rules of this new world before you can decide if you like it or not.
I feel like fantasy in the last 10, 15 years like finally got really, really good because authors sort of figured out, not that there was no good fantasy before, but authors finally kind of figured out how to navigate that, like dropping you in and not having to have the first 2 chapters be, exposition.
Exactly.
How to drop you in and still keep you interested and then like slowly teach you the rules.
Exactly, So this match between Lesnar and Bryan, the context coming from 2 different directions. For the on the first hand, there was Bryan, who had gone into early retirement due to post-concussion issues a few years before that. And he had just recently come back, and the crowd was really excited for him immediately when he came back. But after a few months, they kind of quieted down. His babyface character was kind of stale. The crowd wasn't so into it. They were more interested in people like AJ Styles.
You can only have your character be "I'm back" for so long.
Yeah. And at the same time, AJ Styles had just had this year-long title reign, which started in the sort of weird, surprising manner at the previous Survivor Series, or just before the previous Survivor Series. They had also billed a champion versus champion match. At that time, it was Brock Lesnar versus Jinder Mahal. And they had AJ Styles win the title just before Survivor Series, so the match became Lesnar versus Styles, which was much more exciting for the fans. And it was a great match. Lesnar won. Styles went on to have this long title reign. Evan, you already saw him wrestle Shinsuke Nakamura at WrestleMania that year, which we covered on one of our premium episodes for our $5 tier Patreon. And so now Survivor Series was approaching again. The match was supposed to be Brock Lesnar versus AJ Styles, but at the SmackDown just before Survivor Series, Daniel Bryan wrestles AJ Styles for the title. The match is booked because in the story because Paul Heyman comes out and kind of goads AJ Styles into it by saying that AJ Styles is the greatest in-ring performer of this generation except for Daniel Bryan. The second he said that, I knew Bryan was winning the title that night because he was putting him over in a way that would set up for a match with Brock Lesnar. So during the match, the ref gets bumped. Bryan kicks AJ Styles in the balls and ends up winning the title in this heelish manner.
Yeah, he's still ostensibly a babyface right until that moment.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So now he's a heel. Now they're going to have a rare heel versus heel match in Lesnar versus Bryan, which is always an interesting thing to see how that's going to go. And so Bryan is in a sort of delicate position, which we'll talk about a little bit more, just in terms of having to wrestle the guy who's going to be the aggressor in the match, Lesnar. He's going to fight from the bottom. He's going to be sort of in the babyface position, but he just has this brand new heel character that he wants to keep a heel. So that gives the match a really unique dynamic.
In a lesser wrestler than Daniel Bryan, they wouldn't be able to pull it off. But he's the best. He knows how to work his character.
Yeah, I would say most wrestlers were not.
Yeah.
That's a lot of challenges to put in your checklist, to try to hit in, a week's notice?
Yeah,
Right?
less.
Because I don't feel like that was planned a couple of months out by any means.
I think you can see the whole situation as a kind of puzzle that Bryan had to solve, and he did so brilliantly. Yeah, so I guess we can start with the entrances, which
Cool.
are really interesting. Bryan comes out and he starts to do his yes pose because the crowd likes to chant yes along with him, but then he doesn't do it. He does it like a couple times and then stops. When he walks to the ring, he does this little monkey walk for a second, which is a subtle reference to an episode of Total Divas when Bryan was in retirement. And he's talking to Sami Zayn, and he's explaining to Sami Zayn the new wrestling style that he was developing specifically to wrestle Brock Lesnar. And he's showing him these little like monkey moves and stuff. And so he's suggesting to the crowd, anyone who could pick up on that, oh, maybe I'm going to have this match that I had been planning with Brock Lesnar for years and everyone had been looking forward to. As early as WrestleMania 31, which we talked about, that match between, also behind the paywall, between Reigns and Bryan, where, everyone wanted to see Bryan versus Lesnar at that Mania. And that match never happened. Instead, we got this match, which was quite different. So Bryan goes to the ring. He has a weird smile on his face. The announcers are saying he seems to know something that we don't know.
Which I think is very vital. I'm going to add my own personal context to this. I have a very boring job. I am a bellman at a hotel that works the night shift, so there's nothing to do.
Oh, I know a couple of guys that do that, yeah. They get in a lot of World of Warcraft.
So I watch a lot of things on my phone. And
There you
so
go.
Sunday nights, if it's a WWE pay-per-view, I'm watching in the back. However, my shift ends at 10, and that means the last hour of the pay-per-view is me walking to the train, waiting for the train, and sometimes cut off by the train.
I hate
That's
that.
the context in which I watched this match.
Oh, boy.
Waiting on the subway for a train, and I hear that line specifically, and I'm like, they don't say that unless something's up. And now that something could ultimately lead to the result we all assume is going to happen anyway, Brock Lesnar winning, but there's going to be something happening. And that, putting your audience in that zone, that intrigue, is the most important thing to me about professional wrestling.
Though, of course, the live crowd doesn't hear that
That's
line.
fair, yeah.
So they're not primed for something unique to happen.
No, what the live crowd gets is Daniel Bryan taunting Brock Lesnar, which nobody does for obvious reasons, and getting Lesnar to chase him around and basically trying to get Lesnar to grab him and throw him.
Brock Lesnar really looks like an escaped test subject from a Nazi superhuman.
He really
like,
does.
It's like a shaved
Left.
bear with
Yeah.
a person's face.
He is a boy from Brazil, 100%.
Like, Brock Lesnar is an anomaly in the professional wrestling world. The contracts he signed are anomalous. His athletic prowess is anomalous. He's not the most charismatic guy in the world, but his presence is unlike anybody else. They're trying now. I think they're trying now to give him kind of an Andre the Giant-ish aura, which
Yeah.
is very difficult. But he has it. He comes out, and you presume he's just going to win in 30 seconds unless he doesn't.
Now, Bryan, when he's doing this taunting, is not doing it in like a fun, entertaining way that might get the crowd behind him. He just seems like kind of a jerk. He's running from Lesnar like a coward. So he's still, he's being a heel, even against this, but without making Lesnar the babyface.
All right, so I had a couple thoughts about this match. One was this felt like the midterm for what have I learned about wrestling so far, in the sense that it was this was clearly a match about psychology and about two characters, which obviously you could argue that literally all wrestling matches are that.
3 characters.
And
this is what you're still missing. So
Okay.
wait, let me talk a little bit more about the match.
Okay.
So after Bryan's taunting, Lesnar finally catches him and kills him. He hits him with a suplex that looks like it cripples Bryan. Bryan sells it like he's had another concussion, right? He hits him with another suplex and another suplex. And Bryan is not fighting back. He's not giving the crowd anything to get behind. He's just selling like he's dead. And you start to think, oh shit, they're just going to have Lesnar squash him like they said they were going to do apparently at the SummerSlam a few years before that. After Bryan won the title, the report was that Vince McMahon said, oh, I want to break the fans' hearts. And they did it with John Cena basically instead because Bryan was injured then as well. So he just kills him with no fighting back. So the crowd doesn't turn against Lesnar. They don't start booing Lesnar. They start booing the match because they don't think they're going to get what they paid for or what they expected or what they wanted. They think they're just going to get a squash at this point. And it's heartbreaking. I'm thinking as a fan watching it, shit, I can't watch this anymore. Like, this is over for me. They just ruined my favorite character.
Yeah, even if the crowd didn't want Bryan necessarily to win on a heel babyface kind of thing, the hardcore fans that finally saw Bryan win the title again, even if they're game to go along and boo his character, they still really love him. And even if Brock beats him, fine. But if Brock is just going to beat him to no response and then just win, which is not past the possibility, then it's a real betrayal to the fans.
They just did it with Kofi Kingston, and if I were a hardcore Kofi Kingston fan, I would be done. Like they would have just, completely destroyed my faith in the product.
I have a friend who was the whole summer. He's like, I'm not gonna get rid of my network account if Kofi is the champion. I have to keep. I can't be a bad faith thing. So the moment that happens, he's like, cool. Now I can get rid of my WWE. Like, it's a bad faith situation with that.
Before we over-explain this, I do want to hear the rest of Evan's impressions because we have a lot of explaining to do. But I want to hear what he has to say.
Okay, I mean, there's the way the match turns.
Yeah. Well, let's hear Evan's impressions, and then we can over-explain.
Yeah.
There'll be plenty of time for contesting this
all
match.
right. Here is the greater issue, I guess, and this plays into a lot of what we talk about on this podcast. So while I was watching the match, all right. So there's everything that had, like, I watched the promo that he does on the following SmackDown. And then there was the whole bit that we were talking about before we started recording there where you were kind of explaining to me like the fuller picture of the storyline and of the psychology and everything like that. And I guess it kind of comes back to the central issue is as I was watching the match and didn't have every shred of context, I was like, the fuck am I watching? I was like, okay, I understand to some degree what is happening. I understand the psychology here. I understand that there's going to be hopefully some sort of interesting reversal that you don't see coming because it becomes obvious early on, like, all right, well, Bryan's going to have some sort of a comeback, right? They're not just going to make me watch this.
But the crowd didn't think that. They made the crowd think he wasn't going to have a comeback.
Is there a precedent for that where, like, they will just beat somebody up for 20 minutes and
Brock
that's
Lesnar specifically.
Oh.
So that's Suplex City became the thing.
Is that fun?
John Cena, it's the crowd hates it, and that's so. Evan, you said before that this was a match between 2 characters. It was not. The third character here is the audience. And if you don't fully appreciate that, you haven't actually grasped what's happening in the match.
So one piece of the psychology I think that's very interesting is that Brock Lesnar doesn't try and win the match. He doesn't cover Daniel Bryan.
When he finally breaks a hold at one or a pin at one point.
Well, he finally hits his finish, the F5, which one of has been beating everybody recently. In an age where everybody has to hit their finisher a bunch of times, Lesnar hits one F5 and he wins. And he covers Bryan half-heartedly and then pulls him up and laughs. And if I could, all the way to the finish of the match, when Lesnar does win with the F5, he gets a nice, snug, hooked leg cover, and in the story, isn't that Bryan can beat the Beast. The story is that the Beast did not take Daniel Bryan seriously. By the end of the match, he very much took Daniel Bryan seriously.
I mean, that's one of, 6 stories being told.
One level of the story.
But on even just the most liminal level, it's a rope-a-dope, right? You can grasp that idea, even without the context of Suplex City. You're like, all right, the little guy is trying to, maybe not going to work, but he's trying to
outlast.
But it's the specific selling that Bryan does.
It's the Braun fight in season 1 of Game of Thrones, where Braun is like avoiding the guy with big heavy armor, and until the guy just gets tired, and then Braun.
Yeah. But so the way that Bryan is selling is subtle, but really important. He's not selling like someone who's taking big damage and trying to fight back. He's selling like someone who is just taking it and just being ragdolled and doesn't have anything.
He's not trying to get
sympathy.
The word is sympathy.
Yeah.
So to go back to that line of he knows something we don't know, in the night of, you again assume it's a strategy to win the wrestling match. Tuesday night, when he in his promo explains the something that we don't know is that he's trying to have Brock Lesnar beat the old Daniel Bryan out of him. That's the something we don't know. His winning isn't about winning the match. It's about
to some degree, I think this is a rationalization to like part of like trying to make the story make sense.
But it worked,
and it worked, yeah.
And that's the thing. It's only a cop out if it doesn't work.
So here is maybe something I did not understand about wrestling beforehand, and maybe this is part of me not really giving wrestling the credit it deserved beforehand. So you're saying that it is something that will regularly happen in wrestling, where they will have a match, a big fucking deal match, and the point of this match is to alienate the audience.
It's to anger the audience. What the WWE has been achieving has been alienating their audience.
It's a really delicate balance.
If you have the confidence of your audience, and this isn't just in wrestling, it's in like all forms of media. If you have the confidence of your audience, where your audience will let you torture them because they know the payoff will eventually be good, then you can tell stories like that. And in this match in particular, the WWE does not have the confidence in their audience. But when the crowd finally completely turned on the match, there was this turnaround. And you can see when the turnaround happens, the crowd doesn't start cheering. The crowd immediately bolts to their feet and are paying attention. And they want to see maybe Bryan can beat Brock Lesnar. And the rest of the match, the crowd is red hot.
And they want to see Bryan beat Brock Lesnar, but they do not cheer for Bryan himself. He still remains the heel. They still don't like him, but they want him to win. But this is where Bryan, I think specifically as the artist, comes in, because he knows the WWE has been so bad at satisfying their customers that he can trade on that fact in order to produce this great match.
Specifically with his character, I might add, where they've consistently noted how popular he is and then haven't gone with him.
And so, that's what's also feeds into his character even more as the guy working against the huge machine that's trying to keep him from expressing his art.
So I'm gonna go back to a question you posed.
Yes.
About how there's your matches that are actively trying to anger the audience.
Mm-hmm. And like in a way, just to clarify,
okay.
like not in a way where the heel is supposed to make the audience upset, but in a way where like the point is to make the audience go like, fuck this.
The booking is the biggest heel in the company now.
But even when that's not an accident, when that is the intention, those are the same functions. The heel's promo coming out and saying your sports team sucks, and this match putting on that they put on are to serve the same idea, the same way that in a horror movie you're seeing all these characters you're supposed to like, at least again in the platonic ideal, get killed to get heat on the slasher, so that when the final girl puts it away, we're that more satisfied. If there is no anger, there's no happiness.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of, it's interesting bringing you in 2019 where there is a lot of failure and there is a lot of peeking behind the curtain, but the same ideals are in place since, the primordial age, which is like David, Goliath. Like this match, while it is a perfect example of all this stuff, that's what's so interesting, is that we are lost in a desert and we see this water and we're treating it like it's the greatest thing in the world. It's like, this is what wrestling is supposed to be. It's not that complicated. This is just a complicated version of it.
WWE, one thing they really are good at, though, is spinning things. So sometimes it's really frustrating because it's like, well, did they plan this,
Sure.
complex machination, or are they just rationalizing,
Well, sometimes, you'll go see a band you really like that maybe you don't know that they're terrible live, and you go see them live and they're just like they're just not good at it. Like they're out of tune, and you get angry at that. And then sometimes you'll go see like John Zorn, and who is a master musician, and you'll see an hour of music where he is specifically trying to upset you and make you question, like, why did I come out tonight? Why do I enjoy what is wrong? And like point out all of these contradictions. And like one thing kind of sucks, and then the other thing is art and is a confrontational kind of art. Yeah. And maybe you think it sucks, maybe it doesn't. But and I guess I was not ready to recognize that the second thing can exist in wrestling, because I was so used to the first thing being all of the bad wrestling that I saw.
It's a thin line, and we've mentioned Andy Kaufman before.
Yeah.
When you go to see Andy Kaufman, has he ripped you off? Or has he produced a masterpiece?
Right. Well, certainly today, because he's been dead for decades.
But
he got all that from wrestling is the thing. And people know that kind of. But no, he saw the bad guy wrestlers and like, man, nobody's just trying to be hated. What if I did that? And it was a massive success.
Or John Cage, like, is he a fucking ripoff artist or is he brilliant with, 333?
It's also the same.
433.
430, yeah, whatever.
Magic, it's fake. They tell you that, and then they fool you.
What?
Like, that does, the skill isn't in making something disappear and bringing it back. It's making you question how they did that.
Sure.
And there's plenty of, again, postmodern magicians out there who will say that their pledge will involve exposing the business.
Yeah.
And tell you to watch everything that they do, and that itself is having you look over here so they can do the actual trick. This match, again, is trying to accomplish a simple goal, but because of how quote-unquote smart the audience has become, in order to pull that trick off, we have to make the match the heel. The company, who accidentally has been doing that to themselves already, but play into that in a way that no other art form really can. To be like, you think you like music, but you hate music? Like, that relationship doesn't really exist in that fandom, as far as I can tell.
It's like this is a concept that not only exists in wrestling, but might be unique to wrestling. The idea that you will purposefully infuriate the fans, and so it's a matter of let's find new dimensions for this. Let's find in 2019, after too many years of WWE, after too many human sacrifices to Vince, what are some new ways that we can use this thing that is at the core of it.
You got to think of the audience to some degree as the medium. Like, that's what you're manipulating. Literally, like painters manipulate paint and musicians manipulate sound.
To go back to the horror movie thing, it's the same thing. Is in a horror movie in 2019, it's so hard to actually boo the bad guy, so to speak, because you're there for it. You're there for your Freddy and your Jason. I know they don't really make movies anymore, but that's the movie Us is flipping that thing to be like, who is the heel, who is the babyface in this thing.
And we've talked before on this podcast about there's sort of this new wave of what they call prestige, like elevated horror, prestige horror, which just means horror that's directed well.
Sure.
And also kind of just means like one thing that all these movies have in common is that there's no part where where you give up on the protagonist because you think they're so dumb that they're like, all right, well, you deserve to get murdered if you're going to go into the basement by yourself. Like,
but now imagine you were watching that movie and you think that you're like, this dumb person's going to the basement, and I don't know how to tie. Like, that's what's great about this match. I don't know how to make the horror movie analog here, but somehow they get you to then go, wait, no, that final girl was smart this whole time. I'm the idiot. And I really hope they kill that slasher. Like that, you don't see.
I want to point out that at the end of this match, the crowd is satisfied, and the result that they wanted didn't happen.
Exactly, and that,
both of those things.
Go back to Bryan's promo, the goal was not to win.
Right, the goal was not to win.
And in wrestling at large,
yeah,
the only reason you should care about wins and losses and baby faces and heels is to give you that reaction.
Right.
So if you can have a reaction like that without any aspect of professional wrestling being a sport, that's still accomplishing the goal. It's an entertainment company.
And not that Bryan wasn't trying to win in the story.
No, for sure.
Which he should be. If a wrestler isn't trying to win, like, who the fuck cares about the match?
Sure.
In some respect.
Well, he was looking for a fight.
Right. I want to say a couple more things about what happened in the actual match. Right. So, speaking of music, I thought of my mom saw Thelonious Monk a couple of times in her youth, and she mentioned to me that he would show up, pass out on the piano because he was like doped up or something, and then he'd pass out on the piano and be out for like 15 minutes. I mean, it seemed the crowd would be like, oh, he must be doped up or something like that. That was, I guess, what he was trying to portray. And then after 15 minutes, he'd play one note. And then 5 minutes later, he'd play another note. 5 minutes later, he'd play another note, and then he'd be off to the races. And it reminded me of that because Lesnar beats the crap out of Bryan for 15, 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden, Bryan kicks him in the head once, and the crowd lights up.
Which is the most forgettable thing in most matches, is somebody going to be picked up and then the other guy hits them once. Your brain will just... It's a blind spot that your mind just blurs over because you know where they're moving on to the next thing.
Since
But they
he's
managed.
gotten no offense in up
Exactly.
till this point, none. They didn't waste that hope by giving him a bunch of hope spots. Now, 15 minutes into the match, he moves a little. Okay, is something going to happen? And Lesnar sells it. Lesnar sells it like, oh, I got kicked in the face. He's not dead or nothing. By the third time he got kicked in the face, he's angry about it.
And then Bryan starts to unleash some offense on Lesnar. He never appeals to the crowd once. He doesn't do a yes chant or anything. He doesn't even fire up at all. He just goes at Lesnar, hits him with some high-flying moves, but really he kicks him in the nut. First of all, he reverses the F5 by colliding with the referee in a really slick way, and then kicks Lesnar in the nuts, and then hits him with his big flying knee and tries to pin him, and that doesn't work. Then he starts like bringing out the big guns, the high flying moves, and his submission moves. And Lesnar, actually, we should not discount his great selling. When he's in the label lock, his eyes are wide like, oh shit, man. I think he might tap me out.
He looks genuinely surprised.
So Brock Lesnar is like a Super Nintendo boss. The more damage you do to him, the more he glows red, so you can see that it's coming.
But even before that, he's also a boss, because the whole thing, you're going through and you're trying to figure out what's
the weak point here?
What animation should I wait for to do this thing?
He does look more like a Dark Souls boss than pretty much any wrestler we've seen so far.
Everything that Bryan does from this point forward in the match is a finishing move too. He doesn't start to build upon anything for emotional. He's just his big knee, flying drop kick, throw his entire body at him, try and get his one finishing hold on over and over again, and the crowd is with it the whole time, like the match could end at any minute, which is the purpose anyway.
And going back to Brock selling, it's very rare that I feel like selling is a plot point. It usually seems to just be a thing you do in between things. He gets him up for that F5, and then his leg gives out to go into the
that was
label
fantastic.
Lock. You would think from an outsider that would be a much more common thing in professional wrestling, and it's maybe more common than I'm setting it up to be right now.
There's so many matches where they work a body part, like they work on the leg the whole match, and then it does not play into the finish at all. They just forget about it.
And then, Charlotte versus Asuka. Her arm hurts, and then she does the figure 8 with one arm, and so it didn't matter.
So it doesn't matter.
And it's like, cool, great.
We should watch that one eventually.
I did have a thought while we were watching this match, because the first Daniel Bryan match we watched, I was like, oh, like he's like a guy like I could be friends with. Like that's kind of what it seems like. And then Ben, you had kept describing Daniel Bryan to me as possibly the greatest wrestler of all time, and then I watched the AJ Styles match and I was just like, okay, so his moves are primarily kicking people in the balls and running away.
Another thing retroactively justified in that promo, where my favorite thing in narrative is when somebody's philosophy doesn't change but their alignment does. And when that whole promo he says, it's like, my whole thing was have your dreams, fight for you, never give up, right? That's the thing we're told. Don't let anything stop you. So why would the rules of wrestling be a thing that stops him from living his dream?
And
that's such a good philosophy for a bad guy.
The promo also, it's the thing that makes the promo on SmackDown after the match so effective is that everything he says is real. He did spend months and years in hyperbaric chambers because a bunch of doctors said maybe this will help your concussion protocols. And then when his brain was getting better, he went to university after hospital to get brain scans and tests to show my brain is getting better. Let me wrestle. And the WWE wouldn't for such a long time. Really, until he started threatening to when his contract was up, just be like, well, if you're not going to let me wrestle, I'll go to Japan and wrestle. I'll go to Mexico and wrestle. You're not going to stop me. So you could sign me or you could not.
Which plays into the idea that they really are holding him back this whole time. They don't want him to be their top star, even though the crowd loves him. Why? Because he's like progressive politically. You know, he eventually replaces the WWE title with an eco-friendly, hemp-based WWE title, which he could do as a heel. Right, as a heel, they'll let him be this great environmentalist heel that everyone boos.
Which, again, from the outside, people who hate wrestling without ever watching, you go, "Oh, great, that guy's the bad guy because of global warming." It's like, I get that, and that's ultimately in a meta narrative probably the truth.
Yeah.
But from a performer, from the artist and performer's perspective, again, it's another challenge of that guy to be like, how do I use the things about me that are true that I don't think are bad to become a bad guy? Sami Zayn is doing that right now in a way that is next
fantastic.
level. It's like it's not the content of the words that are necessarily, it's the way they're said, but also the reason he's saying them. And there's a inherent hypocrisy to every wrestling heel in the world ever, but it's like that only it's not a hypocrisy where he's like, I'm claiming to be an environmentalist, and then we found backstage footage of him eating a double Whopper and throwing it on the ground. It's that he's doing that to be like, I need to save the world so you can all love me. Like, I'm the only one who can save the world. It's like
He's the holier than thou
Exactly.
environmentalist, which is a fucking asshole, right?
And you can play that as a babyface too. When CM Punk was the WWE champion and a babyface, and you know, one of his big deals is that he was straight edge, and like they were in England, and I can't even remember who the heel was, but they were like, we found video of you going into a pub,
Yeah.
and there's video of him going into a pub, and Punk is in the ring with a microphone, and just like, I met a friend and we had some fish and chips. That's what you do in London, and the crowd cheers like, yay, fish and chips, London. That's where we are.
And
you know,
he diffused hypocrisy because he's like, yeah, my friend drinks.
Yeah.
I don't.
I'm
met
not
him at
judging
the bar.
you.
Exactly.
When he's a heel, he totally judges
Yeah.
you for doing all of
That's
that.
what I'm saying. The same philosophy, different alignment.
Yeah, it seems to really just be about, are you using who you are as a person as something that creates a shared experience with the audience, or are you using this thing as are using yourself as a person as a wedge between you and the audience, or as a thing to say, like, I'm better than you.
And where that becomes the failures in professional wrestling right now, Bayley just turned heel, and instead of it's the opposite of what I just said I liked, so I don't like it, is when she comes out with an axe and tears down like her big things. That's like
Her inflatable tube man.
Yeah,
yeah.
You can do that metaphorically. You don't have to literally see her do that in order to get people to boo you. That feels depth. Like there's no sleight of hand there. There's no skill to that. It's just going, you know what, that thing you liked about me, I'm no longer that. It's like, well, yeah, that's
especially because her character seemed like we did the Sasha Bailey match a few episodes ago,
and the Brooklyn,
and we talked about it a whole bunch on last week's minisode.
Yes,
that we haven't actually recorded yet.
Yes, yeah, that's But something that I really liked about her was that she was like anti-edgy. Yeah. Like it was like the opposite, the inverse of the 90s, where she was just like, I'm not cynical, I'm just a very positive person. And it seemed like it would be really easy to turn that into something
that character
exactly the same. Where it's just like, I'm really positive. Unlike you fuckers.
Exactly.
Like, that's so easy.
But now she's just saying, now what she's doing is going, you guys are fuckers, also I'm not positive anymore. It's like, cool, neither of those things work together necessarily.
Let's just throw this character out.
Exactly.
They see that, that is
They
really
never understood the character to begin with on the main roster, which we'll talk about a lot more. I wanted to say one more thing about... because you're saying, his offense is mostly nut shots and that sort of stuff. You do get a couple of glimpses of the brilliant technical wrestler Daniel Bryan in the match, like the transitions from the label lock into the triangle choke, and then Lesnar reverses that into the F5. You get these little spots of great wrestling. We'll watch Daniel Bryan matches where that's the main thing.
And just want to hit another thing that reminded me of when he gets in the triangle hold. And again, I'm on the subway waiting for stuff to buffer and so it's jumping around a little bit. Maybe that added more dramatic tension, and that's why I love this match a little bit more. But with wrestling, the triangle hold is not Daniel Bryan's finisher right before the match, but you don't know if he tapped him out there. Now we can run with that forever. He has
beaten people with triangles in Ring of Honor.
Right. But
Years
in WWE,
previous, yes.
but in WWE he hasn't. So we are trained to believe it right now. It can only be the knee or the belt lock. But then you remember he beat John Cena with the knee out of nowhere at SummerSlam, and that's where the knee came from. So I'm watching that going, yeah, this could be an entryway into a new development for this character where he taps him out with a triangle. And the reason I'm bringing that up is, again, this is a match that got, I think, maybe not every, but most gradients of fans to believe in a way that in 2018 was very difficult to get anybody to believe. Like, to guess what's going to happen and be satisfied with either outcome, but before the match started, that wasn't anyone's attitude. Everyone comes in with that same, like, well, let's see if Brock Lesnar does the same old shit. By the end of it,
they did chant same old shit during the lowest point of the match when they had turned on it.
So you're saying, so really what grabbed you about this match, really when it comes down to it, is just the layers going on here. Not to say that it's just that, but that there is so much going on, both in terms of what actually happens in the match, what it means in the greater storyline, how the two of them are using the psychology of wrestling. Like it's all there,
and how it plays with the audience's expectations,
including my own.
Exactly. Yeah, because I was along with the whole crowd,
and that's
I
so
believed
rare
that
a
they were
wrestling
doing
match can get you that on the same page with what the artist's intent is.
Especially
that's hard
how
for art
rarely
in
it
general.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
In the WWE, how rarely they
Especially
actually get
the
you on their
WWE.
page, because they are trying. People like, they're not even trying. No, they're trying and failing.
They have very few people like Daniel Bryan.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no one else like Daniel Bryan, basically. But there were a couple. There was CM Punk, and they lost him because he just, could not express himself within the WWE machine.
Yeah, there's
Also, he had MRSA, and they weren't letting him see a doctor or stop wrestling. I think that gets shuffled under the table kind of a lot.
Yeah.
There's a generational disconnect, though, and Daniel Bryan has explicitly said this before, where it's like Vince McMahon's motive is only money.
Yeah.
And Daniel Bryan's like, oh, that's not what I'm here for.
All right, so we're going to start wrapping up today. So, Fesh, please plug everything that you have to plug.
All right, well, we talked about XSW. We're a monthly live show. We're also on IWTV.
At the Pit Loft.
At the Pit Loft. You can follow us on Instagram at Extremely Serious Wrestling and Twitter at Extremely Serious. I got a horror movie podcast called I Was Scared Too. It comes out every Friday. I do weekly screenings of horror movies in the back of a bar called Crystal Lake every Monday at 11 p.m. No one ever comes. It'll be me and you if you do. It'll be fun. I think that's it.
Where is this bar?
Crystal Lake. It's on Grand Street in Williamsburg. Okay. Every Monday after an open mic, they just give me the room, and it's usually me and one other person just watching a horror movie I chose. I'm
sure
okay with
fun.
that, but if more people come, I'd be more okay with that. I think that's it.
All right.
Cool. All right, so I guess we'll go around. Once again, my name is Doc Diamondfire. I'm at Dr. Diamondfire. That's Dr. Diamondfire on Twitter. Message me to book me for your shows, doing commentary, ring announcing, wrestling, whatever you want me to do. I will be appearing for XSW. I can't tell you exactly when because we record this about 2 months in advance, but rest assured I appear there regularly, among other places. Professor, give us your information.
Yeah, Dr. Ben Abelson. Follow me at ScribeBen on Instagram and or Twitter.
All right, my name is Evan Burke. You can follow me on Twitter, Evan Burke, etc. That's Evan Burke, ETC. And read my writing at evanburke.biz, and hopefully I'll have something new up there at some point.
Thanks so much for being on the show, Fesh.
Yeah,
thank you
Fesh,
for having me.
Seriously, this is awesome. I cannot recommend enough, especially if you are like me, if you're listening to this podcast and you're on my fucking side. First off, good for you for being better than everyone. And also, I really enjoyed XSW. It was a lot of fun. If you only vaguely know about wrestling, but you enjoy comedy, you absolutely should fucking check it out because it's hilarious.
Yeah,
Doc
definitely.
is hilarious on it.
Thank you.
Fesh's stuff is hilarious. Yeah, it's great. And we will do a more in-depth interview with him in the future. Alrighty, we good? Anything else?
Well, this has been Contesting Wrestling. We will see all of you again very shortly.
Thank you.